Hi, welcome to the quiz. You can answer along on quizalto.com, all for free. The exact URL of this quiz will be in the notes down below. Let's get started, good luck. Can AWS CodeBuild integrate with third-party CI/CD tools? Yes, it integrates with many third-party tools. Yes, but only with Jenkins. No, it only integrates with AWS CodePipeline. No, it only works within AWS. AWS CodeBuild can integrate with many third-party CI/CD tools such as Jenkins and GitHub Actions. Can AWS CodeBuild builds be manually triggered? Yes, but only through the CLI. No, only through CloudWatch events. No, only automatic triggers are allowed. Yes, builds can be manually triggered. You can manually trigger builds in AWS CodeBuild through the console, CLI, or SDK. How can you monitor the status of AWS CodeBuild builds? Through AWS Artifact. Using AWS Config. Through the AWS Management Console and CloudWatch. Using AWS Trusted Advisor. You can monitor the status of builds through the AWS Management Console and Amazon CloudWatch. What is AWS CodeBuild primarily used for? To store code in repositories. To build and test code. To manage infrastructure as code. To deploy applications. AWS CodeBuild is a fully managed build service that compiles source code, runs tests, and produces software packages. What is the purpose of the cache section in a buildspec.yml file? To specify directories or files to cache. To define the build commands. To manage build environments. To configure IAM roles. The cache section in a buildspec.yml file specifies directories or files to cache, reducing build times. What languages does AWS CodeBuild support? Multiple programming languages. Only JavaScript. Only Java. Only Python. AWS CodeBuild supports multiple programming languages such as Java, Python, Ruby, JavaScript, and more. What happens if an AWS CodeBuild build fails? The build is automatically retried. The source code is deleted. You can view the logs to diagnose the issue. The project is terminated. If a build fails, you can view the logs to diagnose and fix the issue. What does the reports section in a buildspec.yml file define? The build timeout. The source code repository. The environment variables. How test results are exported. The reports section in a buildspec.yml file defines how test results are exported to Amazon S3 or other destinations. What service can be used to store and version Docker images for AWS CodeBuild? Amazon ECR. Amazon RDS. Amazon SNS. AWS CodeDeploy. Amazon Elastic Container Registry is used to store and version Docker images for use in AWS CodeBuild. Can AWS CodeBuild be used for both continuous integration and continuous delivery? No, it cannot be used for either. No, it only supports continuous integration. No, it only supports continuous delivery. Yes, it supports both CI and CD. AWS CodeBuild can be used for both continuous integration and continuous delivery as part of a CI/CD pipeline. What is a common use case for AWS CodeBuild? Automating the software build and test process. Monitoring application performance. Hosting static websites. Managing cloud infrastructure. AWS CodeBuild is commonly used to automate the software build and test process as part of a CI/CD pipeline. How can you limit the build duration in AWS CodeBuild? By restricting IAM permissions. By setting a build timeout in the build project. By limiting S3 storage. By configuring EC2 instance types. You can limit the build duration in AWS CodeBuild by setting a build timeout in the build project configuration. What is a buildspec.yml file in AWS CodeBuild? A file that defines the build commands and settings. A configuration file for EC2 instances. A deployment descriptor. A file that stores source code. The buildspec.yml file is a YAML file that contains the commands and settings used by AWS CodeBuild to run a build. What is a build project in AWS CodeBuild? A repository of source code. A configuration that defines how to run a build. A storage service. A virtual server. A build project in AWS CodeBuild is a set of configuration settings that define how to run a build. Can AWS CodeBuild be integrated with AWS Lambda? Yes, but only for build initiation. Yes, for running post-build actions. No, Lambda functions cannot be triggered. No, they are separate services. AWS CodeBuild can be integrated with AWS Lambda to run post-build actions such as deployment or notifications. What feature allows you to see detailed build logs in AWS CodeBuild? AWS X-Ray. AWS Config. AWS CloudTrail. Amazon CloudWatch Logs. AWS CodeBuild integrates with Amazon CloudWatch Logs to provide detailed build logs. Does AWS CodeBuild support environment variables? No, environment variables are not supported. Yes, both plain text and parameter store variables. Yes, but only parameter store variables. Yes, but only plain text variables. AWS CodeBuild supports both plain text and parameter store environment variables. Can AWS CodeBuild be integrated with AWS Secrets Manager? No, only AWS Parameter Store is supported. Yes, to securely manage build secrets. Yes, but only for environment variables. No, secrets must be hard-coded. AWS CodeBuild can be integrated with AWS Secrets Manager to securely manage and use secrets during builds. How do you update the build environment in AWS CodeBuild? By specifying a new Docker image. By updating IAM roles. By modifying the S3 bucket. By changing the source code. You can update the build environment in AWS CodeBuild by specifying a new Docker image in the project configuration. What source code repositories can AWS CodeBuild integrate with? Only Bitbucket. Only AWS CodeCommit. Only GitHub. GitHub, Bitbucket, AWS CodeCommit. AWS CodeBuild can integrate with multiple source code repositories like GitHub, Bitbucket, and AWS CodeCommit. What does AWS CodeBuild use to isolate builds? Lambda functions. EC2 instances. Docker containers. S3 buckets. AWS CodeBuild uses Docker containers to isolate builds, ensuring a consistent and clean environment. What is an environment in AWS CodeBuild? A deployment target. A storage location for build artifacts. A source code repository. A combination of build configuration and resources. An environment in AWS CodeBuild includes the build configuration and resources needed to run the build. What is the phases section in a buildspec.yml file? It manages user permissions. It defines the steps of the build process. It stores build artifacts. It specifies the runtime environment. The Phases section in the buildspec.yml file defines the steps of the build process, such as install, pre-build, build, and post-build. What is the purpose of the Artifacts section in a buildspec.yml file? To configure the build environment. To manage user permissions. To specify the programming language. To define where the build output is stored. The Artifacts section in the buildspec.yml file defines where the build output is stored. What is the privileged mode setting in AWS CodeBuild? It provides enhanced logging. It enables access to EC2 instances. It allows the use of Docker within Docker. It grants additional IAM permissions. The privileged mode setting in AWS CodeBuild allows the use of Docker within Docker, enabling more complex build environments. And that's a wrap. Thanks to everyone who participated. Remember, you can answer along on quizalto.com, where you can keep track of your progress and find much more quizzes. We hope you had a fun and challenging time. Until next time. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel for more. Hit the bell icon to be notified as soon as we upload. Please leave a comment if you have any thoughts or suggestions, and, if you think this video is worth sharing with someone who could benefit from it, please forward a link to them. See you next time. Thanks for watching.